So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining the February edition of the Ohio Workforce Coalition's monthly webinar. We are pleased today to be bringing you a presentation from Kyle Fee, a senior policy analyst with the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. Since 2007, the Ohio Workforce Coalition has been bringing together leaders from across the workforce development ecosystem, really working together to grow opportunity across Ohio through advancing policies that support individual workers, improve the quality of jobs, and build transparency and equity into our workforce system. We will have time throughout the call to ask questions, but if you do have a question, you can enter it into the chat at any time, and we will make sure to get to those as soon as possible. Please do, if you're just joining us, introduce yourself in the chat and let us know if there's anything in particular you're really hoping that we cover today. These webinars are on the fourth Thursday of each month at 1 o'clock. They are recorded and they are all available on our website, which you see there on the on the slide. You can also find them posted via our Twitter link. If you are a tweeter and use social media, please feel free to follow us and we will follow you back. If you are so inclined, we are continually fundraising to support the efforts of the coalition. You can also link to opportunities to donate on the website. So with that, it looks like everyone already is muted. You can keep yourself muted. If you have a question, feel free to jump off mute and jump in or enter it into the chat. So as I mentioned, we have Kyle Fee with us today. Kyle has delivered several webinars for the coalition over the years and really has been a leader locally on questions of job quality and occupational mobility and really digging into what the data tells us about each. So I'm excited to learn what he's been up to. Kyle is a senior policy analyst in the Department of Community Development of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. And in that role, he conducts applied research and outreach related to a range of topics, including economic development, workforce development, neighborhood, economic geography, all in the 4th District, which includes all of Ohio, portions of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Northern Kentucky. Kyle has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Economics and Business Administration from John Carroll and a Master of Arts in Urban Studies and Economic Development from Loyola University in Chicago. He is finishing his PhD at the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. We will be eager to hear him come report out on his dissertation work when he's all done with that. So again, if you are interested in tweeting and being involved on the social media front, we're going to drop in the Cleveland Fed's social media handle, and you can tag Kyle, introduce yourself in the chat if you're just joining. And with that, I will turn it over to Kyle.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Let me get set up here. And share. Can everybody see my screen? No, wrong screen.
We can. Well, we see that.
Yeah, I want to show you the other one. Sorry.
That's okay.
Can't give you the secret sauce behind the notes. All right, here we go. Again, thanks for the opportunity, Rebecca, and the rest of the Ohio Workforce Coalition. I really appreciate it. And I guess I will look forward to presenting future work once I finish my dissertation on this stuff. A quick overview of community development too. I wanted to kind of make sure everyone's kind of aware of community development at the Federal Reserve Bank. Generally, we focus on issues that promote economic opportunity for people and communities that are low and moderate income communities or people. As Rebecca mentioned, we cover the fourth Federal Reserve District, which is all of Ohio, the western third of Pennsylvania, the eastern half of Kentucky, and the little panhandle of West Virginia. So very diverse geography with some historic Rust Belt implications and issues that we kind of continually interact with. In the Community Development Department at the Cleveland Fed, we have what we like to call an outreach research model where we find things in the community that are bubbling up or becoming issues. We then come back to our shop, dig into the research, whether that's the existing literature on a topic, or actually it's usually starting with the existing literature on the topic and then seeing where we can kind of add value with any of more updated data or any kind of specific type research questions that might be applicable to our district. We generally focus on three broad topics of within our work. The first is housing, so affordable housing broadly. That's kind of an ongoing issue, so it's covers things as it relates to access to credit, but additionally things like contracts for deeds and vacant abandoned property. So we're kind of pretty active in that space. We also have a very active portfolio in the small business credit survey. So looking at credit conditions for small businesses and seeing how they're faring as it relates to those issues. And then lastly, our last bucket is economic and workforce development. I like to kind of describe them as so workforce is the supply of labor, and economic development is the demand for labor locally. That's kind of how I think about it in my brain. And the economic and workforce development connection for us is related to one of our mandates of the Federal Reserve System around maximum employment, which basically means making sure that anyone that wants a job and can have a job is able to get a job, broadly speaking. All right, let's get started here. So this is from a recent report that I did last fall. Carter can throw the link in the chat for you guys to read at your own, but this is kind of give a large overview of what that's going to be about. As always, these are my views and not the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland or the Federal Reserve System. So you can take that for what that means. And again, these are just my views and not representative of the Fed. Some high-level takeaways to start out with, to kind of answer my question that I posed in the title slide. Yes, job quality does appear to affect occupational ability, and it affects occupational ability to the detriment of workers in lower quality occupations. Shouldn't be too surprising to folks on this call, but it is, to be able to see it in the data is kind of confirmatory to a lot of the anecdotal information that we already have. The second bullet is, I think the job quality kind of is a great lens from which to kind of view the current labor market. I mean, the current labor market is coming off of just over 50 million job quits in 2022, which was a record high. Current labor force participation rates are down from pre-pandemic levels. And the number of job openings per unemployed people is roughly 2 to 1 nationally, and in Ohio it's about 1.7 job openings per every unemployed person in Ohio. So again, thinking about how job quality might provide some additional color and context to the current labor market is a value add here from my perspective. And then my third bullet point or third major takeaway is for my data folks out there. Those of you that have seen me talk before know that I'm a data nerd and love to kind of get my hands messy in the data. But this point is more about kind of a new data source and an overlooked data source that most folks in the workforce development field might not have very much experience with, and that's the microdata that's produced, publicly available microdata that's produced, and then it stands behind all of the American community surveys and census products. The IPUMS website is a website that allows you to access kind of the individual microdata that shows individual characteristics as well as other demographic information. And this microdata is used to kind of aggregate it and then used to build up to create what we know as the kind of the publicly released estimates according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Census Bureau, for example. And this work is kind of an intersection of two of my major interests or two of my lines of work. The first being occupational mobility, and the second, of course, being job quality. Our occupational mobility portfolio kind of originated with some of our work around opportunity occupations. For those of you who are not familiar with opportunity occupations, this was a line of work that was simply just trying to identify which occupations were available to somebody that did not require a four-year degree, but still paid kind of a decent amount still paid a decent wage, and we measured that as above the area median income for a region. A little bit on job quality too, as it relates to opportunity occupations. It's kind of still in that same vein of interest. But it's generally kind of thinking about economic mobility and someone's prospects for economic mobility based upon that individual's occupation or kind of career, with the thinking that you'll have more opportunities at economic mobility if you can put folks in the right occupations for their skills, but also provides wage growth and wage passes for them to kind of grow and meet their needs as they need them to be. The second bullet on the slide refers to another report that I wrote with my colleagues out of the Philadelphia Fed, Keith Wardrop and Kyle DeMaria. And this report, entitled A Skills-Based Approach to Occupational Mobility, was really an aspirational approach. It was a couple of years ago when we asked the question of, what could be possible as far as occupational transitions or movements based upon someone's skills that they have existing, and then the kind of the skills that are required for a destination occupation is what we call it. So we wrote that report, and then we also created something called the Occupational Mobility Explorer, which was a way for us to operationalize a lot of the data that we had sitting on the sidelines from this report and make them useful and put them out there for folks to use in their communities, whether that is for kind of career planning discussions, or if it's just a conversation starter for someone that's just thinking about some of this type of information about what they want to do when they grow up, for example. And it could also be used in the opposite direction, thinking about how likely someone might be to fill a hard-to-fill occupation based upon some of their previous skills. So kind of working backwards, so to speak. All in all, I feel like it's part of a growing use and recognition of skills and how skills can be used to inform pathways. You're seeing a lot of folks in kind of the tech space dipping their toes in this work, creating platforms and apps that will not only do some of the work that the Occupational Mobility Explorer does in identifying potential transitions, but they'll also identify individual training opportunities, and some will even hook you up with specific jobs, so to speak. And then this last data point here is kind of another data issue. A lot of the work that we've done in occupational mobility comes from the ONET, which many of you are familiar with. I've done some work using online job ads. Folks have been mining resumes to kind of do some of this work. But I think the microdata is especially useful because it allows us to follow folks, and it allows us to gain some additional information as it relates to each person that I'll utilize later in my analysis. To clarify what I mean about occupational mobility, this is kind of a conceptual model that I just created this morning, so forgive my lack of graphic design and refinement here, but I think it does the job that I needed it to do here. When I mean by occupational mobility, I'm referring to a situation where someone is currently holding an occupation, and then what happens next. So they can currently hold the occupation, and then next month, when I observe them in the data, they're still holding that same occupation. Now that same occupation could be for a different employer, so to speak, but I can't observe that in the data. So they're either in the kind of that same occupation, or they move to a completely different occupation in the following month, or they could transition into being unemployed or ultimately leave the labor force. And then the rates that I'm going to show later in my findings section are just that. They're the percentages of people that start in a current occupation and then move to each one of these destinations throughout. So it's actually a kind of a direct mapping of the shares of worker flows across each of these spaces. And then job quality. I think there's a growing recognition and appreciation for this in the current labor market, as I mentioned. It has been a topic that has come up almost every year that I've been in the community development department. So for the past several years, it's always been something we hear about, but it's always kind of stayed in this workforce development world conversation. Whereas now I think it's being pushed into a broader recognition and a broader conversation about the labor market. One of the things that the Federal Reserve System did last year is something that we call the Worker Voice Project. And this was a project where we held focus groups to listen to directly from workers themselves. And one of the themes coming out of this was job quality is important to workers, and it's something that's increasingly on their mind. So it's something that we should increasingly be discussing. But you'll see more about that from the Fed in the coming months. And then lastly, what makes a job a good job? Maureen Conway from the Aspen Institute was on this webinar a couple months ago. If you haven't seen it, I would encourage everyone to go check that out. And she's going to do a much better job of discussing what makes a good job a good job. But for the sake of this webinar, I wanted to show you everyone the kind of working definition that they've come up with, along with a host of others to kind of coalesce around a working definition. But it defines a broad range of attributes that generally drive the worker experience. So you've got things that relate to economic stability, which are generally wages and scheduling and working conditions. There's also components of a good job that refer to economic mobility, so your ability to move up the kind of economic ladder, so to speak. So what other pathways, what kind of training opportunities you have, and even some wealth building opportunities. And then lastly, there's the aspects of having equity and respect and a voice in your job. So again, I'd refer everyone to Maureen's webinar for more on that, but I just wanted to mention it here. And now this is also a recent definition. So I think one challenge with all definitions, especially the definition on kind of working job or good jobs, excuse me, is the difficulty incorporating it with some of the data, right? So some of these components here, especially those in the economic stability, can be easily quantified and captured and assessed. But the attributes under economic mobility and equity and respect are a little bit more challenging to kind of capture in quantitative data. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's been so challenging to explore and research, but there is a growing body of research related to job quality. And it's got some basic tenets that I think are worth repeating, that are useful and have been useful in my thinking as I've done this research. So workers who are more likely to hold low quality jobs tend to put greater value on job quality. not surprising. So if you think you have a low quality job, that means you kind of value that a little bit more. We also find that workers value components of job quality differently. For example, female workers put greater emphasis on scheduling than male workers do. And they're also willing to trade greater control over their scheduling for a little bit of a lower wage. But overall, I think job quality has also been connected to issues related to racial equity, as disparities have been documented across several job quality dimensions. There's also kind of the business case that can be made for improving job quality. Believe it or not, that's not just a worker issue, but businesses can also benefit from investing in job quality here, as it really, and then in hopes of strengthening operational efficiency and competitiveness of a company, as well as retention challenges, as workers are more likely to stay in higher quality occupations than in lower quality occupations. But in general, job quality has influence over the quality of a worker's life, financial status, and overall health. Which is, and this brings me to this last point here, that workers in the low quality occupations are more likely to leave the labor market or become unemployed, and they are unlikely to move into a better quality occupation. This last analysis by Gabe Abel in Florida serves as kind of a stepping off point for my analysis, or even motivation for my analysis. Given the way theirs analysis was constructed, they have a number of years from which they pool data, so they really can't look at trends in job quality and occupational mobility over time. So it's unclear how this kind of dynamic has changed over time, if it is at all. And I think for me, one of the big questions is that most researchers these days are thinking about is, how has the pandemic changed this issue? So we're going to kind of dive into it and look at it from a data perspective.
We have one question.
Shoot.
So will you be tracking these movements by occupation and by age? Curious to see from a hospitality perspective how that workforce moves through those transitions and at what age. And Sean, if you want to unmute to clarify, you can go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kyle. I was thinking back to the slide that had the graphic of current job, staying within the profession, moving to a different occupation, unemployed, leaving the labor force.
Yeah, so I do a little bit of work in the end of this analysis by focusing on the individual worker characteristics. So if I don't answer your question then, Sean, let's bring it up again, because I want to make sure that's clarified, because this is some additional work that I'm kind of pursuing as this year is right now this work's grouped by job quality, but I would love to dig into this work in specific to certain certain occupations and think about career pathways and movement in and out of different occupations. So if I don't answer it later, let's make sure I'm clear on what your question is, and we can hopefully see if we can answer it in some future work.
Great, thank you.
All right. So as I mentioned, we're using microdata from the American Community Survey and the current population survey. And the microdata is retrieved through the IPUMS website. If you search IPUMS, you can find it. It's a little bit more technical data set to work with, but if anybody has any real interest, I'd be happy to have a conversation with them and share some tips and hints and tricks. The data I'm looking at is from 2010 to 2021. So we don't have that last year, but I'm confident that if I do additional work, it'll be pretty similar to kind of what I'm going to show you today. And then lastly, this job quality index consists, I had to create my own because there isn't one, and I create an index based upon the average hourly wage, average hours worked per week, average weeks worked per year, and then the last one, which I think is most important, at least from a proxy standpoint of trying to get at other attributes that an employer might offer, but the share of workers in an occupation in which health insurance is available through an employer or a union. And then I standardize all these variables by computing z-scores and then sum them up to produce my job quality index. And then I use the index to divide the labor market into four different groups based upon their job quality that are roughly equal shares of employment so they're easier to compare. And here's some information as it relates to my job quality index, so you can see that I'm not crazy, and that actually kind of does map to what you think it should map. Occupations in the lowest quality quartiles are characterized by lower wages. They have part-time employment. Less than half of workers receive employer-provided health benefits. And these are occupations like ushers, hosts and hostesses, retail salespersons, childcare workers, personal care and home and health aides, cashiers, fast food workers, waiters and waitresses, etc. Workers in the lowest quality occupations tend to be younger, more likely to be female. They also have lower levels of educational attainment and are more likely to be people of color. And they're predominantly found in the retail trade, accommodation and food services, and then healthcare and social assistance sectors. Conversely, we have high quality occupations that have higher wages, full-time schedules, and 4 out of 5 workers receive employer-provided health benefits. These are your accountants, your computer support specialists, architects, lawyers, crane operators, optometrists, various types of engineers and managers. And these occupations are more likely to be found in professional and business services, manufacturing, as well as finance, insurance, and real estate sectors. For a complete listing of the job quality, of the occupations by job quality, it's in the appendix of the report if you're curious. All right, so digging into the findings here. So this figure is the rate at which a worker remains in the same occupation by job quality quartile. As I mentioned before, it's literally the percentage of workers that remain or that move to each one of these based upon the share of total workers. So, the first thing that jumps out to mind here, and again, pointing out the blue line is the lowest quality occupations, the orange line is the highest quality occupations. And the first thing that jumps out is that workers in lower quality occupations stay in the occupation less than workers do in higher quality occupations. So on average, it's about 86% of the time the worker remains in that low occupation, compared to about 93% of the time for a higher quality occupation. The other thing to point out here too is that the rate at which a worker remains in the same occupation for all quartiles, that rate has been declining over time, and it's been declining most for workers in the lowest quality job. So they've kind of seen a bigger change over this time period than we've seen in workers for higher quality jobs. But importantly, I think to mention too is that this trend has started prior to the pandemic. So I know a lot of folks like to say that the pandemic caused trends to happen. In all actuality, we find that the pandemic generally exacerbated a lot of pre-existing trends. So again, a pre-pandemic trend that kind of continued going forward.
So Kyle, can you say a bit about what time frame it represents people staying for? Did I get that question right, Alicia? I think we're looking, when you talk about the rate at which a worker remains in the same occupation.
Oh, gotcha.
How long?
So this, my data, I can observe workers monthly for a set of 6 months. So this is reflective of each month, and it's kind of aggregated for an annual number.
Thank you.
And then another thing I wanted to kind of point out here too is from 2018 to 2019 and even 2020, we see this kind of large dip, and this dip is, from what I can tell, is due to a lot of workers in the lowest quality occupations going into other lower quality occupations. So it's a lot of kind of churn within this low quality labor market. This next figure shows you the rate at which a worker leaves an occupation and then essentially leaves the labor force, or just kind of pulls himself out of the labor market. Again, there's differences between the lowest and highest quality occupations, with workers in the highest quality occupations more likely to leave the labor force. In fact, they're roughly 3.5 to 4 times more likely to leave the labor force than a worker in a higher quality occupation. And then if you squint a little bit, you can also see that this is increased over time. Workers in 2010 were, 4% generally left the labor market. In 2021, we've got just shy of 5% of workers leaving the labor market from lower quality jobs. Moving to our third figure here, this is the rate at which workers flow into unemployment or become unemployed. Again, the lowest quality workers are more likely to become unemployed than higher quality workers. And this is, this large spike here is following the business cycle. So, it's at least consistent with economic conditions in that regard. But it also shows that, workers in the lowest quality occupations saw a disproportionate increase in unemployment as it relative to workers in the higher quality occupations. So the jump that they saw in 2021 was larger than the jump that we've seen in other levels of job quality. And this brings us to our last kind of figure to share for this discussion. And this is focused strictly on the workers in the lowest quality occupations. So basically all the workers that were in the orange line from the previous slides. I was interested in looking at, okay, so are they going into other very low quality occupations, which is the blue line? So this is that kind of worker churn question that I mentioned before. Or are we seeing some economic mobility and some upward occupational mobility relative to job quality? And that's this red line. So are workers in the lowest quality jobs going into any of the 3 groups that have higher quality? And, starting with the blue one first that we find, first, both of these outcomes are kind of relatively infrequent, less than 5%. So they're, just kind of take that as some context. But you can, again, if you kind of squint, you can see outside of that large increase in 2019, so there is some slight upward trend to this blue line, which basically says that, or indicates that there's, increasing churn amongst lower quality occupations. So workers are just going from one low quality occupation to the other. Turning to the red line, I think there's, market improvement over this time period, but again, it is small numbers, going from roughly, 3.5% to, 4.75%. But that does indicate that workers are actually able to get into higher quality occupations and have, higher wages and better scheduling and have benefits and those types of things. So a longer term trend that kind of slowed down a little bit towards the latter half of the previous decade, but longer term trends that we are continuing to monitor as time progresses. And now, since I was really kind of interested in building on this current figure, I really want to dig into kind of, are there any specific worker characteristics associated with any of these specific mobility outcomes that I just showed you, whether it's staying in the same job, leaving the labor force, becoming unemployed, or going into a higher quality occupation. And for the sake of time, I've kind of just pulled some highlights from the report that'll help folks as they think about it, but and it also helps us kind of gain further policy insights too, because I think some of these things are kind of not really head scratchers, but they kind of make a good deal of sense as it relates to of job quality issues and occupational mobility. The first one, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise to folks. But rates of educational attainment are associated with greater likelihood of attachment to the labor market and finding a better occupation. There's a lot of literature and a lot of personal experience from folks in this call, I'm sure, that say that skills and skill development and training and even formal educational tracks are associated with better economic prospects going forward. So I can confirm that with my analysis. The second bullet point is kind of a unique one. I think it's interesting that, well, let me just tell you what it is first, but it says that industries like construction and manufacturing actually hold more promise for workers' ability to find a higher quality occupation than industry sectors that have the highest concentrations of low quality occupations. So again, these are the hospitality type things, accommodations. When you think about it, it kind of makes some sense though that these industry sectors have large shares of their employment are low quality occupations. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise that there's limited opportunity for someone in that industry to find a higher quality occupation within that sector.
Could I ask a question on that, Kyle, before you
Please.
move on? Does it also mean that the industry sectors like construction and manufacturing, or might it also mean that there's what do we know about barriers to entry to those sectors that offer more opportunity? And is the sweet spot helping people move from one sector to the next where they can bridge, start off in the more entry level and then bridge into these other ones? I hear you about the opportunity in construction and manufacturing, but it seems like they're also harder to get into.
I don't know. That's a great point, Rebecca. And I think with that, that point in mind and in my analysis, I think kind of the policy implications then to me would be what can we do to lower the barriers to entry into construction and manufacturing?
Don't you, by doing that, then also eventually lower wages?
I'm sure you probably would in the long run, but I think most manufacturing and construction workers employers, are looking for workers.
Sure.
There's some long run adjustment to wages, but I think the growth that we've seen in wages in the past couple of years would also add as a kind of incentive for folks to think about going into these those types of industries too.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And then this third bullet point gets at older workers versus younger workers. So, the big takeaway from this was that older workers are more likely to be attached to the labor market than younger workers. And when I say older versus younger, I have a stat in the report that says an older worker that's 45 years old is about 33% less likely to leave the labor force than a younger worker that's 25, as I've kind of built it in the report. So that 20-year age difference it kind of equates to a 33% less likely to leave the labor force for an older worker. And kind of to me, that suggests that, obviously older workers are a little bit much more attached to the labor market, but it also suggests that, job quality might be a more important factor for younger workers than it is to older workers. So something to think about as we perpetually and continually have these conversations around different generations in work and those types of things. So if employers are thinking about attracting a specific younger population, they might want to think about, job quality as a lever for when to pull. And then last but not least, by any means, there are gender and racial disparities present, but a worker's gender and race tends to have a smaller effects based on my analysis on other characteristics. So it's not saying that they're not a factor. It's just that kind of the interaction with other things like age and industry and whatnot, they tend to be kind of smaller effects from that perspective. And then to kind of wrap things up, I think my analysis adds to the growing body of research around job quality. Those in the lowest quality occupations tend to be less attached to the employment and labor market. And it's shown that these are kind of ongoing trends over time and not something that's new or brought on by the pandemic. I also want to emphasize that, again, job quality is a useful lens and an important dimension of the labor market to consider. I think taking job quality into consideration also shows that even when the unemployment rate is low, workers in lower quality occupations can have bleak labor market prospects. For example, in 2021, nearly 9 out of 10 workers in the lowest quality jobs either remained in that lower quality job or in a different one. Workers in lower quality jobs were also just as likely to leave the labor force altogether as they were to move into a higher occupation. And then lastly, workers with lower quality jobs transition to unemployment at 4 times the rate of a worker in a higher job. So again, the job quality lens, I think, to me, explains a lot of some of the dynamics that we're seeing in the current labor market. And then lastly, again, microdata, I think is an underutilized resource, and there's a kind of a lot more work that I'm going to be digging into as this year progresses. So I'll hopefully have some more things to share along the lines of questions that Sean asked. And then, in terms of policy, there's evidence that workers in higher quality occupations remain in the same occupation, and that improving job quality could likely be a solution for employers that are considering or that are having hiring and retention challenges. And then, as I mentioned, as we discussed a little bit too, the industry that workers are in is kind of a really important lever to think about if we're thinking about trying to get workers into higher quality occupations. Here is some contact information, so feel free to email me. There's Fluent Fed Twitter, our website, and then I would be remiss if I didn't advertise or plug our policy summit this year. It's upcoming in Cleveland, June 21st and 23rd at the Hilton Hotel downtown. We'll have a 2-day event that is going to bring a host of experts in to discuss similar topics, but also things as it relates to small business and housing. So thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion. Hopefully I left some time for it.
Yes, you did. We actually have a good 15 minutes or so or 14 minutes for questions. Thank you, Kyle. I'm super excited about this work because I've been thinking a lot about job quality, and I'll put a shameless plug for some work the coalition's been doing, looking at demand occupations across Ohio that keep people eligible for public benefits. And the analysis that we've been working on also uses PUMS data. And so would love to connect and compare notes on what we're seeing for those occupations. And not surprisingly, some of the early findings for the statewide data are that there's a lot of occupational clustering happening. It's difficult to move from, the 10th percent to 90th percent from an earnings perspective, and just lots of interesting stuff. So more to come on that. And if you're interested in job quality, certainly the cliffs come up frequently. We did have a question about the correlation, I think, between job access to job quality. And I want, Alicia, just to be clear, when you're talking about job access, are you talking transportation access. I think being really clear about what we mean by access is important in this context.
Yeah, so for access, we look at that in a couple different ways. Certainly geography, job access in terms of transportation or physical distance and ability to get there, but also for education, background, for training opportunities. We see that, you know, some of the even well-paying jobs that are quote unquote entry level still have a bit of a lip to hop over before you can truly access those. And then all the way up through what I think of as more those professional office jobs, which obviously have a greater entry point than, you know, manufacturing or health or hospitality, healthcare being up there with the office or professional careers as well. So we look at that for access, I guess, if we want to define that. But I think of those kind of barriers or challenges that people face, either that are addressable or not addressable, and how those correlate to the job quality.
So I think in regards to the actual like physical ability to get to a workplace, I have not looked into that as it relates to job quality. I think that's super interesting, especially if you think you know, the higher quality jobs are on the kind of the periphery of the urban area. So that's I'm gonna think about that, and that might actually be some future work for myself to approach. So thank you for that suggestion. And then as it relates to kind of like the ability to access like entry and gain and actually get that job, you know, I think I would just note that most of the jobs in the lower quality buckets that I've created based on my index are generally ones that you know require lower levels of education. So you know, at least there's less or there is a little bit of a barrier to a higher quality job just based upon the educational requirements that someone would have. But I think there's definitely some additional work to kind of fully flesh out that question though.
Thank you very much.
So I could keep asking questions, but this is about you all too. Anyone want to come off mute, share their questions?
Hi, Kyle, it's Lori.
Go ahead, Lori.
One of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around is that people that are going out of the workforce, so where are they going? Do we assume it's gig work, and is that not included? Or are they becoming part of the long-term unemployed, which doesn't get counted anymore? So I didn't know what your insight was on that, because it's still mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, you're not the only one, Lori. I think there's a lot of folks who are struggling with this issue of where the workers are and thinking about you know, the decline in labor force participation that we saw prior, or that, you know, resulted from the pandemic. You know, I think some of them are going retiring early, or maybe even retiring and then coming back, as I've heard a little bit about recently. You know, you think about, there's the childcare issue, which I'm sure many of you guys have heard about, and that comes up as another thing that keeps folks out of the labor market. So that's another one. And then I think it was just this morning, or might have been yesterday, that I was reading an article about how you know, it's actually white men are the ones that have kind of left the labor market fastest. And what's going on there? Is it, you know, them being Mr. Moms? Is it them you know, living in mom and dad's basement? Is it them playing video games? It's you know, it's kind of a head scratcher. And then I've even got some work that looks at kind of the relationship with opioid abuse and labor market participation. So I think there's to answer your question, Lori, I think there's a lot going on, and I don't know if anybody has kind of come to a formal answer or anything like that.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat that looks at whether or not you can transition a low quality job into a higher quality job. Is that even possible? So I certainly have my point of view, but would love to start with you, Kyle.
So just to be clear, the way I'm understanding this question is, how can I take the actual job itself and improve the quality of the job itself, right? I think that's
yes. And Jacob, if
that's
we
the
got
reading.
that wrong, please clarify, but I think that is the question, yes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like we're focusing on people transitioning from lower quality to higher quality, but that's ignoring the fact that, you know, we still need those low quality jobs. So is it possible to transition those low quality jobs into a higher quality?
Sure. You know, I think from my perspective, this is the this is the employer practices and management type of lever to pull. You know, if an employer views their job as low quality, you know, they can address the number of different things that you could do as it relates to the kind of good job definition. So whether it's raising wages, or, you know, flexible scheduling, or at least some sort of set scheduling, or at least communication about scheduling. I think that could go a long ways. And then, you know, we've also heard about folks just giving their workers the opportunity and voice to kind of speak up what's going on about their working conditions, what they would like to see going forward in that workplace. So, you know, I think to make a low quality job a high quality job, to me, is kind of on the employer side and employer practices. Rebecca, you might have another perspective on that too.
Absolutely. And well, I mean, similar, very aligned perspective. And I know there's others of you on this call who've spent a great deal of time in the job quality space, but yes, there are lots of examples of how various sectors and employers in those sectors have transitioned towards better jobs. Increasingly, it's important to just be clear that this is not just about wages, as Kyle outlined several characteristics. We're working on a tool, making a tool available that actually looks at employment characteristics in 6 different domains and a variety of components under each of those. And so there are some very simple, I think what you were trying to say was predictable scheduling, Kyle. So,
yeah.
You know, people knowing their schedule ahead of time. Certainly wages will never go away as one of the components, but there's a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's even as easy as actually asking workers what they're looking for and what would be valuable to them. So we have a couple webinars. Carter just posted the link to the webinars where we've had Aspen job quality folks talking about this, as well as hosted a manufacturing company actually from upstate New York that's done a lot of really great work on job quality within his workplace. But there's a lot of work happening locally, and if that's something you're interested in, certainly please reach out. It's definitely, there's a lot of room to make incremental changes that improve the lower quality jobs so that you're both doing what's good for the company and the employers as well as the workers. And I see there's some additional questions in the chat. Thank you, Alicia. Certainly the Where Are the Workers and Strengthening Workplaces work that the fund has done has good resources for employers and for, you know, community members. And then Jill mentioning, let's see. Oh, Jill mentioned, yeah, there's certainly opportunities to improve the jobs, and Jenna throwing in a resource as well. Jenna, do you want to say anything about that resource?
This is, we're planning 2 3-day summits. There's a link to application there through DOLETA, this Job Quality Academy for workforce boards and state agencies. And we are going to be facilitating a session around building a kind of diagnostic tool around job quality that adds a little bit to what biz services and business retention and expansion folks are asking when they go in and call on employers. So I encourage folks that are in the workforce space to apply for that opportunity if you'd like to help us build some of those. And we'll have a couple of other opportunities that I'll work with Rebecca to help promote too. So yeah.
Great.
And I
With
just
that,
want to
go ahead,
add
Kyle.
one thing too, that I know we put some emphasis on employers to kind of raise job quality. You know, I would also add that the state of Ohio and other states can also emphasize job quality in a number of different ways, whether that's creating employers of preference or any way to incentivize an employer to kind of raise their level of job quality that's not self-interested to the specifically the employer, but from the state.
Yeah, and actually that brings up the point that one of the key strategies is using it through procurement processes. So as big as government's going out to solicit vendors for certain projects, incorporating a job quality lens into the procurement process can help raise the quality of the jobs awarded because of that contract. So let's see, Merle has a question about onboarding and how onboarding and culture might be measured or incorporated into the data around some low quality jobs. Did I get that right, Merle?
Yes.
Okay. So Kyle, any thoughts on how those components play in?
So very difficult to measure those types of things in the data, but I definitely agree that I think onboarding and the culture are big kind of components or underlying components of job quality. So to the extent that can get measured would be helpful, but that's a tall task, I think.
All right. Well, we are just 1 minute shy of 2:00. So I am going to take this opportunity to thank Kyle. This was super interesting. I feel fairly confident that I can say we'll be seeing you back here again as your research continues to develop. And we are grateful that you took the time to go through this. And Kyle has been very generous with his time. I know he shared his contact information. Please do reach out. I think as the Think continues to try to get research into folks' hands, it's helpful to hear what questions you all have. So thank you for joining. Thank you to Kyle and everyone. We will see you next month, where we will be featuring a presentation from the National Skills Coalition, and they will be talking about a new report around digital skills and what are employers really looking for and how do we build those into the folks we're working, into the portfolios of the individuals we're working with. Thank you very much. Everyone have a great rest of your week.